Hey guys, and welcome back to CozyHistory. I wanted to let you know that from now on I'll do all the voiceovers by myself, so let me know how do you like it, and let's start. Our today's topic is the African kingdom that surveilled and influenced Egypt. So, to better understand it, imagine a time more than 4.5 thousand years ago, when one of Africa's first great cities rose along the Nile. It was not in Egypt, but deep in what is today northern Sudan. This wasn't a small village or a trading post, it was a powerful, sophisticated kingdom with towering mud brick monuments, massive fortifications, and a reach that stretched from the heart of Africa all the way to the borders of Egypt. Its name was Kerma, the capital of the earliest known urban civilization in sub-Saharan Africa. And for nearly 1,000 years, from around 2.5 thousand before the Common Era to the 1500 before Christ, the kingdom of Kerma stood as a proud and independent rival to Egypt itself. In this section, we are going to discover how rose the Kerma from the desert sands, explore its utterly unique architecture, and especially the mysterious structures called Deffufas, and uncover the trade, networks, and as well a military strength that made it one of the most formidable powers of the ancient world. So our story begins around 2.5 thousand years before the Christ, in the fertile floodplain near the third cataract of the Nile. At this time Egypt was already building pyramids and establishing its old kingdom, but south of the first cataract, in the region the Egyptians would later call Kush, a completely independent African civilization was taking its shape. Archaeologists now believe Kerma emerged from early Neolithic communities that had thrived in the area for centuries. As the Sahara continued to dry out, people moved closer to the Nile, and bringing with them advanced cattle herding, agriculture, and a rich cultural tradition. By 2400 before the Common Era, Kerma had grown into a true city, the earliest urban center in Africa outside Egypt. At its peak, the capital covered more than 30 hectares, with a dense urban layout that included residential quarters, workshops, palaces, and all the religious zones. Now you can ask, what made Kerma special from the very beginning was its fierce independence. While it traded with Egypt, it never copied Egyptian style wholesale. Instead, the people of Kerma created something distinctly their own, a proud Nubian civilization that would one day threaten Egypt's very existence. So, if you could travel back in time and stand in the center of Kerma around 1.7 thousand before the Common Era, the first thing that would tower over you would be the Western Deffufas. So the Deffufas is a modern Nubian word for these massive mud brick structures, and the Western Deffufas is the most spectacular example. It's rising nearly 20 meters, that's 6 stories high. It was built entirely from sun-dried mud bricks. It had thick walls, internal clambers, wooden staircases, and a flat rooftop platform that offered sweeping views across the Nile. Inside were columned halls, ritual rooms, and subterranean passages, almost certainly used for religious ceremonies at the heart of the city. For centuries, these enormous temple dominated the skyline, serving as the spiritual and symbolic center of Kerma. But the western Deffufas wasn't alone. There was also an eastern Deffufas in the royalty cemetery, probably used for funerary rituals. And at least one more smaller example. These structures are completely unique to Nubian architecture. Nothing like the stone pyramids or temples of Egypt. They show a mastery of large-scale mud brick construction that was a very bit as impressive as anything happening further north. The Deffufas were only the most visible part of Kerma's architectural genius. The entire city was carefully planned and heavily fortified. Massive defensive walls with towers and bastions surrounded the urban core. Deep ditches and ramparts protected the approaches. Inside the walls, you would find something very different from Egyptian cities. Large circular or oval houses built with timber frames and mud plaster. A distinctly African architectural style that emphasized communal living and cattle culture. There were royal palaces with elaborate courtyards, huge storehouses, bakeries producing bread for thousands, markets, and even public water stations with giant ceramic jars. The city had a harbor quarter right on the Nile, making it a bustling riverport. This wasn't a chaotic collection of huts. It was a sophisticated, well-organized metropolis, one of the largest and most advanced cities anywhere in Africa at that time. Kerma's location was perfect, right on the Nile at the crossroads of major trade routes, and the kingdom took full advantage of it. They became middlemen of the ancient African trade network. From deep in sub-Saharan Africa came gold, ivory, ebony, incense, exotic animal skins, or even the ostrich feathers, and sometimes captives. These luxury goods flowed north through Kerma's territory and on to Egypt. In return, Kerma imported Egyptian textiles, jewelry, vines, and manufactured goods. Archaeologists have found Egyptian trade sales, pottery, and luxury items inside Kerma's palaces and tombs, clear proof of intense commercial contact. But Kerma wasn't just a passive trading partner. They controlled the flow by dominating the stretch of the Nile, from the first to the fourth cataract. They could tax, protect, or even block caravans and river traffic. Cattle were another cornerstone of their economy. The people of Kerma were famous for their massive herds, and the cattle appear everywhere in their art and burials. Agricultural surpluses from irrigated fields around the city supported the growing population and fed the traders and soldiers. This combination of river trade, overland caravans, and local production made Kerma incredibly wealthy. At its height, the kingdom wasn't just rich, it was a regional superpower that Egypt had to take very seriously. With great fields came the need for strong defense, and Kerma delivered. Their army was legendary, built around highly skilled archers. The Egyptians even called the entire region Tarseti, the land of the bow. Nubian archers used powerful composite bows and were feared throughout the ancient world for their accuracy and range. The city's fortifications, those thick walls, towers, ditches, and ramparts, were designed to withstand serious attacks, and Kerma's rulers weren't shy about projecting power. During Egypt's Middle Kingdom, Kerma expanded northward, taking control of Lower Nubia and threatening Egypt's southern border. By the time Egypt entered its second intermediate period, around 1650 before the Common Era, Kerma had become strong enough to raid Egyptian territory, and even from alliances against the Pharaohs. This wasn't a minor chiefdom, this was a centralized kingdom with a professional military that could challenge one of the most powerful stages of the age. So, by the middle of the second millennium before the Common Era, Kerma had risen to become a true African powerhouse, a city of towering Deffufas, circular houses, and bustling markets. A trade empire that connected the heart of the continent to the Mediterranean world, and a military force built on elite archers and formidable defenses. It was culturally distinct, proudly Nubian, and completely independent. In the next section, we'll see what happened when these two Nile civilizations, Kerma and Egypt, finally collided head-on, and how that clash led to one of the most extraordinary chapters in African history, the rise of the Black Pharaohs. But for now, picture the western Deffufas glowing red in the setting sun, its massive mud brick walls casting long shadows across a city of 10,000 or more people, a beacon of African power and ingenuity that the world is only now beginning to fully appreciate. We have just seen how the kingdom of Kerma rose as a proud independent African power, with its towering Deffufas, bustling trade networks, and fearsome archers controlling the Middle Nile. For centuries, Egypt and Kerma eyed each other across the cataracts like two lions on the same riverbank. Sometimes they traded, sometimes they fought, but in the end, one of the most extraordinary reversals in ancient history took place. The kings of Kush marched north, conquered Egypt itself, and ruled as pharaohs. The most famous Black Pharaohs on the 25th Dynasty. In this section, we'll watch the dramatic story unfold, the early clashes, the deep cultural exchange, and the moment when Nubian rulers became the legitimate kings of both Kush and Egypt. From the very beginning, the relationship between Kerma and Egypt was never simple. During Egypt's Old Kingdom, which was from 2686 to 2181 before the Common Era, the Egyptians already referred to the south as Kush and sent expeditions to trade, and sometimes raid for gold, ivory, ebony, and soldiers. But Kerma was strong enough to push back. By the time Egypt entered the Middle Kingdom, it was around 2050 before the Christ. The pharaohs built a chain of massive fortresses along the Second Cataract specifically to control trade and keep Kerma at bay. Yet trade never stopped. Beautiful Kerma-made red and black polished pottery has been found in Egyptian tombs, and Egyptian luxury goods filled Kerma's royal burials. The two civilizations influenced each other constantly, even while they remained political rivals. Then, around 1650 before the Common Era, Egypt fractured during the Second Intermediate Period. While the Hyksos ruled the north, the kingdom of Kerma seized its chance. Kerma kings expanded northward, took control of the Egyptian fortresses, and even established a presence at the First Cataract. For a brief time, Kush was the dominant power on the Nile. But the pendulum swung back hard. When Egypt reunited under the New Kingdom pharaohs, they launched a series of devastating campaigns south. Thutmose I and especially Thutmose III smashed through Kerma's defenses. In 1500, before the Common Era, Egyptians finally captured and burned the city of Kerma itself. They looted the palaces, smashed the Deffufas, and built their own temple on top of the ruins. For the next 500 years, Egypt ruled Kush directly as a colony. They installed Egyptian-style governors, built temples to Amun at Jebel Barkal, and shipped vast quantities of gold back to Thebes. Yet something remarkable happened during this occupation. Instead of disappearing, Kerma's culture quietly survived and adapted. Nubian elites adopted Egyptian titles and gods, but they kept many of their own traditions, especially their love of cattle, their boreal customs, and their distinctive pottery styles. This blending created a hybrid Nubian Egyptian culture that would one day explode back onto the scene. By around 800 before the Common Era, Egyptian power in the south was weakening. A new Kushite capital rose at Napata, near the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal. The kings of Napata still worship the Egyptian god Amun, but they saw themselves as the true guardians of pure Egyptian tradition. In their eyes, Egypt had become corrupt and divided. So in 747 before the Common Era, King Pi or Pianki did something no one expected. He led his army north and began the conquest of Egypt itself. Pi's victory stela, one of the longest royal inscriptions ever found, tells the story in his own words. He describes himself as a righteous ruler restoring order. His army moved swiftly, capturing city after city. By 744 before the Christ, Pi controlled the entire Nile Valley, from the Fourth Cataract all the way to the Mediterranean. He didn't destroy Egypt, he ruled it as a pharaoh. And he started a dynasty that would last nearly a century. And this is a moment history books call the 25th dynasty, the era of the so-called Black Pharaohs. Pi's successors, Shebaka, Shebaitku, Tahaka, and Tanwetamani ruled both Kush and Egypt as one vast kingdom. They were not foreign invaders, they were legitimate pharaohs who adopted all the classic Egyptian royal titles, built temples in the Egyptian style, and were buried with full pharaonic honor. Yet they remained proudly Nubian. Their statues show unmistakably African features, full faces, broad noses, and the distinctive double areas, two cobras, on their crowns, a symbol of ruling both lands. Their achievements were impressive. They restored temples across Egypt that had fallen into ruin. Secondly, they commissioned beautiful sculptures and revived ancient artistic styles. King Tahaka, in particular, was a master builder. He constructed huge temples at Karnak, Memphis, and Jebel Barkal, and even attempted to build the largest pyramid in Nubia. And at the last point, they promoted the worship of Amun and tried to bring stability and religious purity back to divided Egypt. So for almost 90 years, these Kushite pharaohs governed the most powerful empire the Nile had seen since the New Kingdom. They faced down Assyrian invaders from the east and kept Egypt united longer than anyone expected. Under the 25th dynasty, cultural exchange flowed both ways, more than ever before. Nubian rulers brought their own artistic flair to Egyptian art, while Egyptian scribes, priests, and architects worked in Kush, the result of a golden age of synthesis. Egyptian temples standing beside Nubian pyramids, and gods worshipped in both lands with equal devotion. But no empire lasts forever. In the next section, we'll follow the Kushites as they retreat south after the Assyrian invasions, rebuild a golden age at Meroë, and create one of the Africa's most fascinating and long-lasting civilizations, complete with ironworking, unique pyramids, powerful queen mothers, and a thriving elephant trade. For now, picture King Taharqa standing on the banks of the Nile at Karnak, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, while Nubian soldiers and Egyptian priests bow before him. For one shining century, the kings of Kush ruled the land of the pharaohs and changed African and Egyptian history forever. But unfortunately, in 656, before the Common Era, the Assyrian army swept south, forced the Kushites out of Egypt, and the kings of Kush retreated back to their homeland. Many might have thought this was the end of Nubian power. Instead, it was the beginning of something even more remarkable. The Kushites moved their capital further south to the city of Meroë. There they created one of the greatest and longest lasting civilizations in African history, a golden age that would endure for more than 700 years. So around 590 before the Common Era, the kings abandoned Napata and established their new royal city at Meroë, between the 5th and the 6th cataracts of the Nile. Why move? The location was perfect. It sat on the edge of the summer rainfall belt, with the rich grazing land and iron ore deposits nearby. It was far enough south to be safe from Egyptian or Assyrian attacks, yet still connected to the Nile trade routes. Meroë quickly grew into a thriving metropolis. At its peak, it covered more than 200 hectares with palaces, temples, royal baths, and residential quarters. Unlike the rigid Egyptian-style layouts of Napata, Meroë felt more African, with large enclosures for cattle, gardens, and a bustling industrial quarter where the real magic happened. If you stood on the outskirts of Meroë around 300 before the Common Era, the sky would have glowed orange at night from hundreds of furnaces. Meroë became the largest iron-producing center in sub-Saharan Africa, sometimes called the Birmingham of ancient Africa. The Kushites mastered large-scale iron smelting centuries before the most of Europe. They built tall shaft furnaces, used charcoal from local acacia trees, and produced iron tools, weapons, and agricultural implements on an industrial scale. Iron wasn't just practical, it became a symbol of Meroë's power and innovation. While Egypt had always relied on imported bronze and copper, Meroë was producing its own iron in quantities that made it one of the most technologically advanced kingdoms of its time. But even though the most visible symbol of Meroë's golden age rises from the desert just outside the city, dozens of steep, pointed pyramids. Between 300 before the Common Era and 350 after the Christ, the kings and queens of Meroë built over 200 pyramids, more than the Egyptians built in their entire history, but these were no copies of Giza. Meroitic pyramids were smaller, steeper, and more elegant, with a sharp 70-degree angle and flat tops that once held small shrines. They were built of sandstone blocks and often decorated with intricate reliefs showing the ruler being blessed by gods, or riding in chariots. Inside, the burial chambers were underground, reached by stairways and filled with treasures, jewelry, and luxury goods. The kings and queens were buried with their favorite horses, sometimes even with their servants, a very different tradition from Egyptian practice. These pyramids weren't just tombs, they were powerful statements of royal legitimacy and continuity with the old gods of Kush in Egypt. Walking through the royal cemetery at Meroë today feels like stepping into a forest of stone spikes rising from the golden sand, one of the most striking archaeological landscapes in Africa. One of the most extraordinary features of Meroitic society was the power of women, especially the royal women known as Kandakes. In Meroë, the queen mother held enormous political and religious authority. Many Kandakes ruled as regents for their sons or even as full sovereign queens in their own right. Their names still echo through history. Ambernias, Amaniskatero, and Naame. Greek and Roman writers describe them with Eve or sometimes fear. The Kandakes led armies, signed treaties, and appeared on monuments beside, or even above the king. Some led their troops into battle against Rome itself. Queen Ambernias, for example, fought a famous war against the Roman Empire around 25th before the Common Era, raiding into Egypt and negotiating peace on her own terms. Statues of these powerful women show them with strong, dignified features, wearing elaborate crowns and carrying symbols of authority. In Meroë, the title Kandake was every bit as important as pharaoh. This level of female political power was rare in the ancient world and highlights how different Kushite society remained from its Egyptian neighbor. Meroë's wealth also came from its control of the African interior. The kingdom became a major exporter of elephants, both live animals and ivory. Elephants were captured in thousand savannas and trained for war or sent north as diplomatic gifts. Roman writers mention Meroitic elephants being used in battles as far away as the Mediterranean. At the same time, huge quantities of ivory, gold, incense, and exotic animals flow through Meroë's markets, and down the Nile or across the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean trade networks. This long-distance commerce made the kings and Kandakes incredibly rich. Temples were filled with luxury imports from Rome, India, and Arabia, while Meroitic craftsmen produced their own distinctive black and red pottery, fine jewelry, and bronze work. By the 1st century Common Era, Meroë had become one of the wealthiest and most technologically advanced kingdoms in Africa, a place of iron furnaces glowing in the night, steep pyramids rising from the desert, powerful Kandakes ruling alongside kings, and caravans of elephants and ivory heading north and east. It was the golden age of Kush, a civilization that blended African traditions with Egyptian influences and created something entirely unique. This golden age didn't end with a single dramatic event. It faded gradually over 2 centuries. By the 3rd century, Common Era cracks were appearing. the massive iron industry that had made Meroë rich had also taken a heavy toll. Vast areas of acacia forests had been cut down for charcoal, leading to soil erosion and loss of farmland. At the same time, the Nile's annual floods became less reliable, as the climate slowly dried out. Overgrazing by the huge royal cattle herds added to the pressure. Internally, the royal family may have faced succession disputes, and the once centralized power of the kings and Kandakes appears to have weakened. Trade routes were shifting too. More goods were now moving by sea through the Red Sea ports, controlled by the rising kingdom of Aksum in what is today Ethiopia and Eritrea. But even though Meroë still had one last burst of defiance, in the 1st century before the Kam era and again in the 1st till 3rd centuries Kam era, the Kushites clashed repeatedly with the Roman Empire. The most famous episode came around 25th year before the Common Era, when the Kandake Amerindias led her army north, sacked the Roman border town of Aswan, and famously decapitated a statue of Emperor Augustus. The head was later buried under the steps of a Meroic temple so that every visitor would tread on the Roman emperor. The Romans struck back, but the Kushites negotiated a favorable peace treaty that kept the border stable for centuries. These conflicts show that Meroë was still a force to be reckoned with. Yet each war drained resources, and the growing power of Aksum to the southeast slowly cut Meroë off from its own most profitable eastern trade routes. Around 350 Kam era the end came. According to a victory inscription left by exhumed King Esanam, his army marched against the Noba. It was a name the exhumities used for the Meroites, and destroyed the royal city. While some scholars debate whether it was a single devastating invasion or the final blow after years of pressure, the result was the same. Meroë's palaces and temples were abandoned. Its iron furnaces fell silent, and the royal cemetery saw no new pyramids. And the great city that had stood for over 1,000 years was left to the desert sands. But the Kushite people did not disappear. They regrouped into smaller successor kingdoms, Nobotia in the north, Makuria in the center, and Alodia in the south, which would later convert to Christianity and continue many of the old traditions in new forms for another 800 years. You can ask, what happened to the people or their culture? So the descendants of Kerma and Meroë didn't vanish. Their genetic legacy, their artistic styles, and their technological knowledge lived on. Meroitic ironworking techniques spread across sub-Saharan Africa. It was helping later kingdoms become stronger. The distinctive Nubian pottery traditions and pyramid building ideas influenced architecture and art for centuries. Even after the Christian kingdoms of medieval Nubia fell to Islamic expansion in 14th to 16th centuries, Nubian identity and pride endured right up to the present day in northern Sudan and northern Egypt. Modern Sudanese people still trace their heritage back to Kush, and the ancient kingdom remains a powerful symbol of African civilization and resilience. So why does this 3,000-year story of Kerma, Napata and Meroë still feel so important? Because it completely rewrites the old narrative that civilization only happened in Egypt or the Middle East. Here was a powerful, independent African kingdom that built cities, mastered iron, produced its own art and writing system. It was a so-called Meroë script, and even ruled Egypt itself for almost a century. It shows us that complex societies in Africa developed along their own unique path, with powerful queen mothers, ritual cattle burials, and a deep connection to the land that was very different from the Egyptian model. In an age when we were rediscovering the depth and richness of African history, Nubia and Kush stands as one of the greatest examples of what ancient Africa achieved. It challenges outdated ideas about who built the first cities or the first empires, and it gives millions of people of African descent a proud, well-documented chapter of history that was deliberately downplayed for far too long. The Deffufas of Kerma have crumbled, the iron furnaces of Meroë have gone cold, and the last pyramids stand silent under the Sudanese sun. But the spirit of Kush, its ingenuity, its independence, and its refusal to be defined by its neighbors still burns brightly. From the towering western Defuffa to the steep pyramids of Meroë, from the arches of Tasseti to the Kandakes who stared down Rome. The Nubian kingdoms remind us that Africa has always been a cradle of great civilizations. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's most extraordinary and often overlooked stories. If you enjoyed it, give the video a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which ancient African civilization should we explore next, or maybe just an other topic. And by that, I'll see you in the next video.